Part 3, Chapter 22. "This way," Eric yelled. Her sneakers slipping on the wet sand, Carrie followed him into the woods. "Hurry," she said to Craig, and tried to peer through the darkness to the pool house. Edward still hadn't emerged. Into the safety of the woods, the three of them running, slowed their pace only a little to follow the twisted path through the trees. The rain had turned to a drizzle, but a fresh burst of large cold drops fell onto them every time a gust of wind shook the leaves. Like rifle fire, Carrie thought. Rifle fire hailing down. The clouds parted just then for the pale moon to show through the treetops, making the woods silvery and ghost-like. The leaves shimmered eerily, wisps of mist rose damp and warm around them. "Where are we going?" Craig called. "Just keep running," Carrie said, breathing hard. "Ouch!" A twig on a low tree branch snapped hard against her forehead. She stopped, stunned by the sudden stab of pain. Rubbing the spot, she realized she was okay. A gust of wind sent another volley of raindrops from the trees. She ducked away, too late, and was completely drenched. They ran a bit farther into the woods. The path ended suddenly, and brambles rose up menacingly, blocking their way. "Where are we going?" Craig repeated, sounding a little more frantic. "Stop! Come on! Where are we going?" They stopped and huddled together under a wide tree. The ground is dry here, Carrie realized. The trees were so thick the rain couldn't get down to them. She struggled to catch her breath. A tremor of wind. The leaves seemed to shiver. "Is he coming?" Craig asked, pressing both hands against the rough bark of the tree. They all listened. The only sounds were the eerie whispers of the wind and their own heavy breathing. "He's going to hunt us down," Carrie blurted out, "like animals?" She pictured again the 4 heads on the wall of the trophy room, the 4 human heads, their expressions frozen in horror. Were they the victims of Edward's last hunting party? "We can't just keep running," she told them, wiping the warm perspiration off her forehead with the sleeve of her t-shirt. "We need a plan." "We've got to get off this island," Craig said, searching behind him, his face reflecting his fear. "We've tried that already," Eric said, tugging nervously at his ponytail. He slapped at a mosquito on his arm. "We can't get off the island without a boat." "We'll build a canoe out of tree bark," Carrie said. "Isn't that what the Indians did?" "Very helpful," Eric muttered. Despite his fear, he smiled at her. "You have a weird sense of humor." "Just trying to keep it together," Carrie said, realizing she could lose the struggle at any moment, fall apart, let the fear take over. At least the rain had stopped. "We've got to call the police," Eric said. "Willow Island is only 10 minutes away. If only—" His voice trailed off. "All the phones are back at the hotel," Carrie said, slapping a mosquito on her knee. "So we'll go back there," Eric said. "You're not serious," Craig exclaimed. "Yes, I am. We'll sneak back to the hotel and call the police." "But what if Edward or Martin?" Craig started. "That's the last place to look for us, right?" Eric asked. "I'm not so sure," Carrie said, rubbing the fresh mosquito bite that swelled on her knee. "We don't know where Martin is, do we?" "They're probably both coming after us," Craig said, his voice trembling, "hunting us down." "So we'll double back, sneak into the hotel, and call the police," Eric said. "Then we just have to hide out until the police get here." "Hide where?" Craig asked doubtfully. "I don't know. In the hotel, maybe," Eric said impatiently. "I think it's safer hiding in the woods," Craig said. "Safe for how long?" Eric asked. "Eric is right," Carrie said. "We can't just hide forever. We've got to do something to save ourselves, to get us away from this dreadful place, and to save Jan. At least if we get into the hotel, we have a chance of phoning someone, of getting help." After a few more seconds of whispered discussion, they all agreed to the plan. "We should stay off the path on the way back," Carrie said, as they started walking quickly in the direction of the hotel. A burst of wind brought another shower of water down on them. And then they heard the rifle shot, and saw Edward just ahead, between 2 low trees. His rifle was aimed at them, poised to explode in another shot. Chapter 23. The second rifle shot echoed off the trees. It seemed to come at them from all directions at once. She wanted to scream, but managed somehow to stifle it. She ducked, her knees hitting the ground hard, and crawled with her friends into the overgrowth. Then, without exchanging a word, the 3 of them were on their feet again and running at full speed, slapping the branches away with both hands. Another rifle shot. From close behind them. It was followed by loud, harsh laughter. Or did Carrie imagine that? In her terror, suddenly nothing was real. Not the bushes that blocked her path, not the slippery, marshy ground, not the shimmering, silvery leaves on trees that circled her, that seemed to move with her, not the rifle shots so near, so loud, nor its ricocheting echoes, not the mad laughter. Edward's horrifying, hunting cry. "Hey, look where we are," Carrie cried, not recognizing her high, tight, breathless voice. They had run through the woods to the ocean. Tall waves outlined gold by the moonlight crashed violently against the shadowy blue sand. They stopped and stared at the water. The beach was flat and narrow here. There were no dunes to hide behind. "We can't stay here," Carrie said. "You're right. It's too exposed," Eric quickly agreed. They stood and caught their breath, listening for Edward, for another crack of the rifle. "What now?" Craig asked, perspiration running down his forehead. Some wet leaves had become tangled in his hair. He hadn't bothered to pull them off. "Let's keep to the plan and go back to the hotel," Carrie said. "Gary's right," Eric agreed. His t-shirt was soaked through. "We're sitting ducks out here." "What was that sound?" Craig cried. They froze, listening hard. The waves crashed loudly against the shore, a continuous roar. Nothing else. No rifle fire, no ricocheting echoes. No bad laughter beyond the trees. "Let's go," Eric said. There was no more discussion. They made their way back into the woods, careful not to retrace their steps, careful not to follow any path, moving as silently as possible as they crept through the misty, hot night. Like frightened animals, Carrie thought. Like wary, frightened animals, running from a hunter, running for our lives. "We're going to die," she thought suddenly. "We're going to be hunted down, and we're going to be murdered." She hadn't even realized as she stopped moving that the others had continued on ahead. Her legs suddenly felt so weak. "I'm going to die. We're all going to die." Her legs just wouldn't cooperate. She felt shaky all over. "I can't move. I can't move another inch. Edward is going to find me here like a frightened rabbit, paralyzed by fear. He's going to find me here and shoot me. And then he's going to laugh." She shifted her eyes and saw that she was alone. Where were the others? "They've left me here to die." No, that couldn't be. That was impossible. They wouldn't. Eric wouldn't. And then she saw Eric coming back for her, his eyes narrowed with concern. And then he had his arm around her. "Carrie, are you okay? What's the matter?" "Nothing. She couldn't talk. She didn't want to cry. She grabbed Eric's arm and squeezed it hard, squeezed it until she had fought back the tears, the urge to cry. "Let's get to the hotel," she told Eric, letting go of his arm. "I'm okay now." And her legs started cooperating again. She followed him through the high weeds to Craig, and the three made their way quickly to the back of the hotel. Moving silently along the wide stretch of beach, they looked up at the old hotel, hovering on the hill above them. Has Edward returned to the hotel too? Carrie wondered. Is he waiting up there for us? Waiting with his rifle loaded? Is that why all the lights have been turned off? And what about Martin? Has he joined the hunting party too? Is Edward stalking us in the woods while Martin waits to trap us in the hotel? "Spread out," Carrie whispered. They were huddled so closely together, she realized, a couple of bullets could get them all. Reluctantly, they moved away from one another. And, crouching low, a relentless wind on their backs, climbed the hill that led to the back terrace. The pool house door had been left open, Carrie saw, but the lights were off now. All lights every place had been turned out. Edward obviously liked to conduct his hunting parties in the dark. A loud crash nearby made her cry out. Her chest felt as if it might explode. Everything went white for a moment, and she struggled to breathe. Just a deck chair, she realized. Just a deck chair blown over by the wind. All three of them froze in place just beyond the swimming pool and listened. Would the sound of the falling chair draw the attention of Edward or Martin? They waited, and listened. Another deck chair, victim of the gusting winds, toppled over. No movement from the hotel, no sign of their hunters. "Let's go." Eric motioned for them to follow him. Carrie took a deep breath and moved silently across the terrace to the dining room door. A few seconds later, they were inside the dark dining room. For some reason, the air felt cooler inside. Moving silently, they walked past the scaffolding, past their unfinished work they would never finish now, toward the double doors to the lobby. "No one's around," Craig whispered, right behind Carrie. "They must both be out in the woods," Eric whispered. "Let's hope," Carrie said, realizing she had her fingers crossed. Flattening themselves against the wall, they made their way into the lobby. "We can use the phone at the front desk," Craig whispered. Eric had already lifted the receiver to his ear. He listened for a few seconds. "No dial tone," he whispered, handing the receiver to Carrie, as if he needed a witness to the truth. "No phone? I don't believe it," Craig cried, forgetting to whisper. Carrie held the phone to her ear. It clicked a few times. Then she breathed a sigh of relief as she heard the steady hum of the dial tone. It just clicked in, she told Eric. Quick, Eric said, his hand on her shoulder. Get the Willow Island police. His eyes darted nervously around the darkened lobby. Operator, a man's nasal voice said in Carrie's ear. Willow Island police? Carrie said, her voice wavering. Is this an emergency? The nasal voice asked, sounding almost suspicious. Yes, Carrie told him. Please, hurry. 1 moment, please. There was a long silence, then rhythmic ringing. Carrie stared at the front entranceway as she waited. If the door opens and Edward walks in, I'll duck under the front desk, she thought. Would she be safe there? Police. The voice was surprisingly deep, startling Carrie out of her frightening thoughts. Hello? We need help, right away. Calm down, miss. How can I help you? You've got to send some men here. We're being hunted. We're trapped here, and... Carrie realized she wasn't making any sense. Her fear was making it hard to think straight, to speak clearly. Where are you? The deep voice asked with practiced calmness. The, Howling Wolf Inn on Piney Island. Please, you've got to come right away. We're really in danger. He's going to kill us. The Howling Wolf. He sounded as if he were writing it down, slowly. Please hurry, Carrie repeated in a shrill, frightened voice. Try to stay calm. We'll be there in 20 minutes, maybe less. He clicked off. The phone went dead. They're coming, Carrie told the boys. When? How long will it take? Craig asked eagerly. 20 minutes, Carrie replied. Maybe less. We just have to hide from Edward and Martin for 20 minutes, Eric said, sounding really relieved. Then we'll be safe. Then we'll be out of this weird place. Where should we hide? Craig asked. Before anyone could answer, the lobby lights came on. The office door at the end of the long front desk opened and a smiling figure stepped out. No, Carrie shrieked. The others gasped. It's got to be a ghost, Carrie thought. Standing at the far end of the desk was Simon Fear. Chapter 24. Simon, in his white suit with a red bandana draped casually around his neck, blinked against the sudden bright lights. He seemed to be confused. He's as startled to see us as we are to see him, Carrie thought. No one said a thing for a few seconds. Simon, you're alive? Carrie cried, breaking the silence. What? He gripped the side of the desk, appearing even more bewildered. Alive? Carrie and the others rushed eagerly toward him. We're so glad to see you, she exclaimed. He was their only friend at the hotel, the only one who had been nice to them, who had welcomed them, who had not tried to frighten them or drive them away. And now, here he was, alive. Back from the dead. Or was he? I didn't expect to see you here, Simon said, pulling nervously at his white mustache. Well, we didn't expect to see you either, Carrie cried. The others laughed, nervous laughter. Are you okay? Craig asked, his voice filled with concern. I'm fine. The question surprised him. Why wouldn't I be fine? What's going on here anyway? Well, Carrie started, but Simon interrupted her with more questions. What are you kids doing up this late? Why aren't you in your rooms? Look at you. You're all drenched. What on earth have you been doing? You've got to help us, Carrie blurted out, unable to hide her terror. We've called the police, but... Simon eyed her warily. The police? It's Edward and Martin, Carrie said. What? Where are they? Simon asked. What is that brother of mine up to? Jen is missing, Eric broke in. We can't find her anywhere, and Martin and Edward are hunting us. Edward chased us through the woods. He was shooting at us. The confused expression softened on Simon's face. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, staring hard at Carrie. Is it another hunting party? He asked. Yes, that's what he called it, Carrie said. Can you help us? You've got to help us, Craig cried. You've got to stop them. Stop them? A strange smile crossed Simon's face. He took a step back, studying them. Stop them? Yes, they'll kill us. They really mean to kill us, Carrie cried. But maybe you... She stopped when she saw the change that was coming over Simon. Why was he grinning? What did that strange grin mean? It distorted his face, made him look not like himself. Why was he grinning at them like that, so coldly? Simon, are you sure you're feeling okay? Carrie asked. Stop them. The grin faded and he became menacing. Maybe you should sit down, Carrie said to him, glancing at her friends, trying to see if they too noticed that something was wrong with Simon. It's been a strange night. Stop them, Simon asked. Why would I stop them? He reached up and suddenly tousled his white hair with both hands until it ruffled out at the sides. Then he tore off the red scarf and tossed it to the floor. Carrie and her friends watched in silent horror as Simon unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. "Hey, what's the matter? What are you doing?" Craig cried. "Please?" Carrie started. Ignoring them, Simon pulled off the white suit jacket and tossed it over the front seat. They watched in horror and confusion as his posture changed. He was stooped now, leaning against the counter. "Simon, please, tell us. What's the matter?" Carrie urged. What is that he's pulling from his pants pocket, she wondered. It didn't take long to see that it was a black eye patch. He slipped it over his eye, his hands trembling with excitement as he fastened the band around his disheveled hair. "Yes, yes, a hunting party," he cried in Edward's voice. "There's no way I can stop a hunting party." Carrie gasped, frozen in horror. No one moved. They all stood staring at the grinning figure in front of them. All three of them had watched the amazingly fast transformation. All three of them realized now that Simon and Edward were the same person. Chapter 25. Stop the hunting party. It was now Edward who was facing them. All traces of the friendly, sophisticated Simon Fear had disappeared. Edward took a step toward them, threw back his head, and laughed. "You're asking me to stop the hunting party." Edward, please," Carrie pleaded. Edward turned and walked quickly over to a lounge chair across from the desk. He reached down to get his hunting rifle, which had been leaning against its side. He's got us now, Carrie thought. It's over. Edward raised the rifle in one hand. Then he held it in front of him as if studying it, wiping the dark wooden stock with his other hand. Carrie frantically searched the room for an escape route. She and her friends had their backs to the front desk. The doors to the dining room were open, but they'd have to run past Edward to get to them. The main entrance to the hotel was across the lobby even farther away, and it was probably locked. "We're trapped," she thought. "We're dead. The hunting party is over." She thought of the 4 heads mounted on the wall. In a short while, 3 more would join them. She shook her head hard, trying to force the hideous picture from her mind. Edward raised the rifle. "Where are the police?" Carrie thought. "Can't they hurry? Shouldn't they be here by now? Maybe we can stall him. Keep him talking until the police burst in and save us." Edward checked the cylinder. "Loaded," he said to himself. "You'll never get away with this," Carrie screamed. It sounded so stupid, like something from a bad movie, but the words just tumbled out. She was shaking all over now, her eyes darting from Edward and his hunting rifle to the front doors across the lobby. "Can't we talk about this?" Craig asked, in a voice so meek it barely carried across the desk. Carrie glanced at Eric and Craig, who were watching the front door too, no doubt hoping as she was that the police would come barging in. Craig, pale and terrified, had a glistening line of sweat above his top lip. Eric was grim-faced and swallowing hard, his hands shoved into his pockets. Talk. The idea seemed to amuse Edward. "You're not just going to shoot us?" Carrie started. He lowered the rifle. "Oh, is that what you're worried about?" He muttered something under his breath, then tore open his shirt a few more buttons. He scratched his chest with his free hand, leaning on the rifle with his other, glaring at them the whole while with his one good eye. "Don't worry," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not going to shoot you now. Right here in the lobby. That wouldn't be sporting, would it?" "Oh, thank God!" Carrie cried. Eric and Craig both whooped and laughed nervously. Carrie didn't relax. She knew there was no reason to trust Edward. He was crazy, after all, totally crazy. "So, you're going to let us go?" Eric asked eagerly. Edward didn't seem to hear him. "We can go?" Eric repeated. Edward looked around the lobby. "Where'd Simon go?" "Simon?" Carrie asked. Good, she thought. Maybe we can get him talking about Simon now. Maybe we can keep him talking until the police get here. "Where is he?" he asked angrily. "That brother of mine. He never likes my parties. He's a bad sport, that's all." "Simon doesn't like to hunt?" Carrie asked. Edward ignored her. "A bad sport," he repeated bitterly. "That's why I tried to get rid of him before the hunting party started. I don't want Simon spoiling the hunting party." "Maybe we should look for him," Carrie suggested, glancing at the others, hoping they were catching on to what she was trying to do. "He'll turn up," Edward said with real bitterness, frightening bitterness, his expression truly ugly. "No matter how many times I try to get rid of Simon, he keeps turning up, like a bad penny." "Are you going to let us go?" Eric repeated. He was standing right behind Carrie now, one hand on her shoulder. His hand was ice cold. "Yes," Edward said. "What? You are?" Craig cried. "Yes," Edward said, smiling. Carrie suddenly felt very light, as if a weight had been lifted from her body. She felt as if she could float, Float away from the hotel, from the island. Float home. I'm going to give you an hour's head start, Edward said. Carrie crashed quickly back to Earth. You're what? I'm going to give you an hour's head start, Edward said, studying his wristwatch. When the hour is up, I'll come after you. But, Carrie started. It's only sporting, Edward said nonchalantly. Martin and I are very sporting. Where is Martin? Carrie asked, her eyes on the front doors. Police, where are you? Where are you? You really don't have time to chat, Edward said coldly, checking his watch. And then, without warning, his face reddened with anger, and he screamed at the top of his lungs. Get going. The hunt is on. Edward, please, Carrie wailed, backing away. Eric's cold hands gripped Carrie's shoulders. Edward, in a wild rage, raised the rifle to his shoulder, spun around, and fired once, twice at the lobby wall. The explosions were deafening. No, Carrie screamed. The hunt is on, Edward bellowed, white smoke pouring from both barrels of the rifle. Carrie and the two boys pushed away from the front desk and ran past the screaming, red-faced Edward, through the open doors, into the dining room. Chapter 26. On the run again, running for her life. Carrie lurched into the dining room, and darkness enveloped her. Trying to blink away the blackness, she felt as if she might suffocate on the heavy, damp air, suffocate on the choking fear she couldn't run from. All three of them stopped in the center of the room. Through the tall windows they could see the starless night sky, nearly as dark as the room. Should they head back outside, back to the woods? That's where hunted animals belong, isn't it? Carrie asked herself, bitterness mixing with her fear. Where to? Eric whispered. Carrie looked back to the doorway to see if Edward was following. No sign of him. Yet. How about the secret passageway? Eric asked, holding on to Carrie's arm. Yes, Carrie quickly agreed. We can hide there until the police arrive. The police, where were they? It had to be more than 20 minutes since she had called. It might be safer in there, Craig agreed, sounding very frightened. They moved quickly through the darkness, propelled by their fear. Carrie got there first and stepped under the scaffolding to the door to the passageway. Hurry, Craig urged. If Edward or Martin sees us. He didn't finish his sentence. A creaking sound from the far side of the room made them all freeze. Was it Edward? Staring into the darkness, Carrie frantically searched the room. Her eyes were adjusting to the blackness. She could make out only the unmoving shapes of tables and chairs. No one there. Just the floor creaking? She whispered. Eric had the door open. The three of them slipped quickly into the passageway, carefully pulling the door closed behind them. It was hot in the passageway and extremely damp. It smelled of mildew, of decay. Carrie's back itched. Both her shoulders ached. She had a sudden impulse to start running, to run blindly through the dark, twisting tunnels. But of course, there really was nowhere to run, she knew. We can hide, but we can't run, she said, not realizing she was speaking aloud. Eric put a hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? She couldn't help it. She laughed bitterly. Okay? In what way? Define okay? She didn't mean to sound angry at Eric. It just came out that way. She apologized quickly. His eyes studied the dark corridor that stretched before them. Will we be able to hear the police from here? Craig asked. I can't hear anything, Carrie said in a loud whisper. We need a flashlight, Craig said, as they started slowly down the long, narrow tunnel, keeping close to the wall. Maybe you should run up to your room and get one, Carrie cracked. Very funny, Craig muttered. Pressed against the wall, they followed the tunnel. They moved in silence, listening as they walked, listening for footsteps, for Edward, for Martin. Every breath, every step, every sound was amplified to Carrie, as if someone had turned up the volume control in her head. She thought about Edward and Simon. How had he been able to fool them so completely? How could one person have both identities? The two brothers had looked so unalike, had acted so unalike, had even sounded so unalike. If only Simon had won out, Carrie thought. If only Simon had been able to drive Edward away. Carrie scolded herself. These thoughts weren't getting her anywhere. Simon or Edward, or whoever he was crazy. Totally crazy. And deadly. He fired the hunting rifle in his own hotel lobby. He didn't care. He didn't care what he wrecked, or who he shot. He only cared about the hunt. He only cared about his prey. Carrie tried to force these thoughts from her mind as she continued to lead the way through the dark passageway. And then she stopped. Oh, what's that? Her face tingled. Something was tickling her face. Stringy things. Sticky, stringy things. They seemed to grab at her, choke her, enfold her as if trying to wrap her in a cocoon. Carrie raised her hands to fight them off, flailing the air wildly. "Carrie, what's wrong?" Eric called. "Help me? Oh, help me!" In her panic, it took Carrie a while to realize that she had stepped into a massive tangle of thick spiderwebs. With both hands she pulled at them, trying to clear them off her face, but they stuck to her skin, to her hands, to her hair, and the more she pulled, the more entangled she became. "Spiders? Oh, help! I've walked right into those spider webs." "Carrie, not so loud," Eric warned. "Edward might hear you." "Spiders? Oh, please, the spiders?" Eric helped to pull the cobwebs off her hair. She shook her hands hard, trying to toss off the sticky webs, desperately rubbing her hands against her clothes. And then she felt something on the back of her neck, something prickly, something moving, crawling down toward her shoulders. She opened her mouth to scream, but managed to hold the scream in. She slapped at it hard, once, twice. She got it with a second slap. She could feel it in her palm, warm and wet. "Oh," she shuddered. A spider. It had to be a spider. An enormous spider. Eric and Craig huddled around her in the darkness. "Carrie, are you okay?" "Yeah, I guess," she said, feeling the darkness swirl about her, the endless walls close in on her. I can't stand spiders?" "Yuck," Craig whispered. "How big was it?" "Big?" Carrie said, still shaking all over. As big as a tarantula, she thought. And then her mind flew off in another direction. "We're caught in a web too," she thought. "We're caught in Edward's sticky web. We're trapped here, trapped in his web, waiting for him to crawl over to us and finish us off." "Hey, this door opens," she suddenly heard Eric call in a loud whisper, startling out of her morbid thoughts. Carrie hadn't realized that the boys had moved a couple of feet down the passageway. She hurried up to them, her neck still itching, her whole body tingling. "I'll never feel normal again. Never." They stepped through a doorway into an empty room. Eric tried the light switch near the door, and a dim yellow bulb, suspended from the ceiling, came on. The room was small, but not so bare as the room that had contained the sticky skull. It had a double bed, Carrie saw, and a nightstand, a two-drawer dresser, and a telephone. "Look," she cried, scratching at her forehead, still trying to rub away the feeling of spiderwebs. "Is it hooked up?" Craig asked, following her glance. Carrie reached it first and eagerly picked up the receiver. Silence. "It's dead," she told her friends glumly. "As dead as we are," she thought. "Of course it's dead," Craig said. "The phones here all go through a switchboard, remember?" "Huh?" Eric cried. And they all realized at once how foolish they had been. "You're right. The switchboard in the front office," Eric said softly. "All calls have to go through it," Carrie said, still holding the dead receiver. "Including the call we made to the police on Willow Island?" She replaced the receiver and dropped down onto the bed, weak and defeated. "Simon came out of the office," Craig remembered, sounding as glum as Carrie. "Remember? He had that odd smile on his face." "I get it," Carrie said, shaking her head miserably. "I get it now. I wasn't talking to the police. I was talking to Simon the whole while." "So there's no one coming to rescue us," Eric said, plopping down beside Carrie. "We're on our own," Craig muttered, glancing nervously toward the door. "Aunt Rose?" Carrie muttered, staring up at the ceiling. "What?" Eric asked. "Aunt Rose? All the calls Jan made to her? Simon must have been on the switchboard then, too, and I'll bet he didn't let those calls to Aunt Rose go through. That's why Rose and her sister never answered. He didn't want Rose here. He was happy she'd gotten sick. It meant she wouldn't interfere with the hunting party, so he—" "Let's move on," Eric said, standing in the doorway, scanning the passageway. "We're still too close to the dining room to suit me." "What's the point?" Carrie asked glumly. "Maybe we can make it all the way to the beach," Eric replied. "We did it once before." "What choice do we have?" Carrie said. Carrie clicked off the light as she followed the others out of the room. The tunnel seemed even darker, even hotter. A sour aroma of decay hovered in the air. "Look," Eric whispered, pointing. Carrie saw it immediately, yellow light spilling out from a crack under a closed door a few yards ahead. They stopped, staring at the thin yellow line. Carrie heard noises from inside the room. Footsteps. A cough. "It's the ghost," she declared, her eyes wide with fear.